Some men spend 40 years building something solid, a career, a home, a reputation they can stand behind without flinching. Maurice Sterling was that kind of man. He had the corner office, the handshakes that meant something, the kind of name that opened doors in rooms most people never entered. Then he met Xanthe Montoya, a woman with sharp eyes, careful words, and a talent for making a man feel like the most important person in the room. And in 2 years, she quietly, methodically, took everything he had built, including the house. The loan officer's name was Patrick Doyle, and he had one of those faces that stayed professionally blank no matter what you said to him. I remember sitting across from his desk in that small, air-conditioned office on Fifth Avenue, watching him type numbers into his computer. I remember the sound of the keys. I remember the diplomas on his wall. I remember thinking, this is fine. This is a smart decision. People borrow against their homes all the time. Patrick slid a form across the desk toward me without looking up. This puts a lien on the property, Mr. Sterling, he said. You understand that if payments are missed, foreclosure proceedings can begin. I understand, I told him, and I did understand. I just didn't care. That was the honest truth of it. I was 71 years old, sitting in a loan officer's chair, mortgaging the home I'd owned outright since 2009, and the only thing I could think about was Xanthe's voice on the phone that morning. Soft, a little worried, telling me that the contract was close, that the deal was almost done, that she just needed a little more time and a little more help. I signed the papers, $505,000 against a house worth $1, $2 million, the house I had paid off with 30 years of work, the house my daughter Carolyn had grown up in, the house I always said I'd pass down to her someday. I signed, and I didn't even feel afraid. That's what I think about now, more than anything else. Not the money, not the house. The fact that I sat in that chair and felt nothing but relief because I was giving her what she needed, and giving her what she needed made everything feel right. That was 17 months ago. The house is still mine, but just barely, and Xanthe is gone. Let me tell you how I got there. Let me tell you the whole thing, because if I don't say it out loud, it's going to follow me to the grave. I spent 38 years as a senior executive in logistics. I won't name the company. It's not relevant. But I'll tell you that I built distribution networks across 4 continents, managed teams of hundreds, made decisions that moved millions of dollars at a time. I was not a man who got rattled easily. I was not a man who made impulsive choices. I had a reputation for discipline, for careful analysis, for never letting emotion drive strategy. That was my professional life. My personal life was a different story. My wife, Patricia, died in 2017. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. We had been married 31 years, and I had not been a perfect husband, but I had loved her with the kind of quiet, steady love that you don't fully understand until it's gone. After she died, I went through the motions, kept working for 2 more years, then retired in 2019. Moved through my days in that big house in Westchester with a kind of hollow efficiency, cooking, cleaning, answering emails, watching the news. My daughter Carolyn called twice a week. My old friend from college, a man named Gene Farrell, took me to dinner every couple of months. I was fine. That was the word I used. Fine. But fine is not alive. Fine is just the absence of crisis. I found a travel forum online in early 2021. One of those communities where retirees swap tips about living abroad, cost of living in Portugal, healthcare in Thailand, visa rules in Mexico. I joined because I'd been thinking about getting out of New York for the winter. I was 69, healthy, with a pension, a paid-off house, and about $780,000 in liquid savings. I had no reason not to go somewhere warm and interesting for a few months. Someone in the forum mentioned the Philippines, Cebu and Manila mostly, but also Quezon City. People talked about the food, the beaches, the cost of living, the warmth of the people. And someone mentioned that there were expat meetup groups there, communities of Western retirees who had found a second chapter in Southeast Asia. I booked a flight to Manila in November 2021 for a 6-week trip. I did not go there looking for a woman. I want to be clear about that. I was not that kind of man, or at least I didn't think I was. I was going because I was lonely in a way that New York wasn't fixing, and because a change of scenery felt like the only honest thing I could do for myself. I met Xanthe Montoya on my 9th day in Manila. There was an expat social event at a hotel in Quezon City, one of those casual Friday evening things where people get name tags and make conversation over drinks. It was organized by a man named Derek Whitmore, a retired Canadian teacher who had been living in Manila for 6 years and seemed to know everyone in the expat community. Derek was friendly, easy to talk to, and he introduced me around the room like I was an old friend he'd been expecting. Xanthe was there as a professional, not a guest. She worked as a consultant. She had her own small firm that provided cultural liaison services to foreign businesses operating in the Philippines. She was there networking, she told me later, because her clients were often introduced through expat circles. She was 41 years old, polished, confident, with a voice that was quiet enough that you had to lean in to hear her properly. I leaned in. "What kind of consulting?" I asked her. "Market entry, mostly," she said. "Helping foreign companies understand local regulations, local relationships. The Philippines has its own way of doing things. Most Western businesses underestimate that." "I believe it," I said. "You're retired?" she asked. "Recently," I said. "Logistics, 38 years. So you understand complex systems." "I thought I did," I said, and I meant it as a self-deprecating joke about retirement. But she tilted her head and looked at me like the answer meant something. "That's honest," she said. "Most men your age say they understand everything." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in a long time. Not the polite kind, the real kind. We talked for 2 hours. She was smart, sharply, specifically smart, the kind of person who asked follow-up questions and actually listened to the answers. She knew about international trade. She asked about my career with what felt like genuine curiosity. She talked about her own work with a quiet pride that I respected. By the end of the evening, I had her number, and she had mine. We had dinner 3 days later. Then again, 4 days after that. By the end of my 6 weeks, we were spending most evenings together. I extended my trip by 3 weeks. I told Gene about her on a video call, and his face did something careful. "How old is she?" he asked. 41, I said. There was a pause. "Maurice," he said. "I know," I said. "I know what it looks like." "I'm not saying anything," he said. "I'm just asking, does she know you're wealthy?" I told him I hadn't discussed finances in detail. He nodded slowly. He said he was happy for me. He meant it. Gene was not a cynical man, but I could hear the worry underneath the words. Carolyn was less careful. When I told her, she said, "Dad, she's 28 years younger than you. You met her 9 days into your first trip to the Philippines." "I'm aware of the math," I said. "I'm not trying to be mean. What do you actually know about her?" "I know how it feels to talk to her," I said. For the first time since your mother died, I know what it feels like to look forward to something." Carolyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, Dad, just be careful." I promised I would. I was not careful. Xanthe and I kept in contact every day after I returned to New York. Video calls, messages, long voice notes. She was warm and consistent. That was the thing I came back to again and again. She never went quiet. She never felt distant. Every morning there was a message from her. Every evening there was a call. By April of 2022, I flew back to Manila for another month. Things between us had deepened in a way that felt real and specific and earned. She introduced me to her colleague, a quiet woman named Patricia Cruz. Not a coincidence I missed. The shared name, who worked at her consulting firm and seemed to genuinely like me. She took me to neighborhoods in Quezon City that weren't on any tourist map. She cooked for me once at her apartment, a small, clean place in a middle-class building. Not fancy, nothing that suggested she was performing a lifestyle for my benefit. That mattered to me. I had half expected something staged. What I got felt genuinely modest. The first financial conversation happened in my third week back. We were sitting on the roof terrace of a restaurant, and she was quieter than usual. I asked what was wrong. "A contract fell through," she said. "A Singapore company I'd been working with for 8 months. They decided to pull their Philippines expansion." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm fine," she said. "It's just the timing. I have 2 staff members. I'll have to let one of them go, probably." "How much of a shortfall are we talking about?" I asked. She shook her head. "I'm not asking you for anything, Maurice. I didn't say you were. I'm asking a business question." She looked at me for a moment. "About $8,000. To bridge the next 2 months while I rebuild the client pipeline." I transferred $8,000 the following morning. She was embarrassed. She said she would pay it back. She sent me a voice note that evening, thanking me in a way that sounded genuinely uncomfortable, like a woman who hated needing help, not like a woman who had practiced receiving it. That distinction mattered to me. I filed it away as evidence of character. I came back to New York in May. She visited me in August, a 2-week trip that I arranged and paid for. I showed her the house. I showed her Westchester. We had dinner with Gene, who was stiff but polite, and I could see him studying her across the table in the way he studied everyone. Quietly, thoroughly. She's very intelligent, he told me afterward. She handled every question I asked without flinching. "That's a good thing," I said. "It's a thing," he said. Then he changed the subject. Carolyn met her for exactly 1 dinner. It was civil. Carolyn was careful and controlled the way she always was when she was working to conceal what she actually thought. Afterwards, she called me and said, "She's impressive, Dad. I don't want you to get hurt." "I've been hurt before," I said. "I can handle it." By October of 2022, I had transferred a total of $42,000 to Xanthe, the $8,000 initial bridge, then another $15, 00 for what she described as a contract opportunity that required upfront research costs, then $12, 00 for staff salary coverage during a slow quarter, then $7,000 for a legal consultation related to a contract dispute. Each transfer came with an explanation. Each explanation came with documentation, invoices, email threads, a letter from a law firm. The documentation looked real. Maybe it was real. I still don't know for certain. What I knew at the time was that she never asked for money without a reason, and the reason was always professional, not personal. She never asked me to buy her jewelry. She never asked for cash without a paper trail. She framed every request as a business matter, which made it easier for me to say yes, because I understood business. Business had logic. Business had structure. I wasn't giving a woman money because she was pretty. I was investing in someone I believed in. That's what I told myself. In December 2022, I flew back to Manila. She met me at the airport, just her, no driver, and on the ride to the hotel, she took my hand and held it without speaking for a long stretch of highway. I remember the city lights outside the window and the quiet in the car, and thinking, this is it. This is what the second half of my life is supposed to feel like. That trip, she told me she had been approached by a consortium of Indonesian and Filipino investors looking to partner with a boutique consulting firm to provide market entry services across Southeast Asia. The potential contract value was substantial. She used the phrase transformative for the firm. How much do they need from you? I asked. It's not that simple, she said. It's a joint venture. I'd need to demonstrate financial stability, operating capital, a reserve account. They want to see that I have the infrastructure to scale. What does that look like in dollars? About $95,000, she said. To establish the joint entity, fund the first 6 months of operations, show the reserve. I did not say yes immediately. I want that on the record. I went back to my hotel and I sat with it for 2 days. I called Jean. $95,000, Jean said flatly. It's a business investment, I said. Maurice, you've already given her $42,000. Those were bridge loans, Jean. She's paid back portions of them. She had paid back $11,000 across 3 small transfers. That was true. I want you to have her firm verified, Jean said, independently. Not by her, not by her colleagues, by someone you hire. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't hire anyone. I asked Xanthe for the firm's registration documents, its client list, its tax filings. She provided them. A folder of paperwork that looked thorough and official. I looked through it myself. I had run businesses. I knew what legitimate paperwork looked like. And this looked legitimate. I transferred $95,000 in January 2023. After that, the rhythm changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but there was a shift that I noticed and chose to explain away. The video calls became slightly shorter. The morning messages became slightly more routine, less specific, more template-like. Though I couldn't have told you exactly how I knew that. The warmth was still there, technically, but the texture of it changed. Like the difference between someone who is happy to hear your voice and someone who is performing the act of being happy to hear your voice. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was a man in his 70s who had been lonely for a long time and was looking for problems where there were none. In March 2023, the joint venture hit what she called a regulatory delay. The Indonesian side pulled back, she told me on a call. A licensing issue on their end. Our lawyers are handling it, but it's going to delay the launch by at least 4 months. What does that mean financially? I asked. I've already committed to 2 staff hires. I have office costs. I need to maintain the reserve account at the required level, or the agreement becomes void. How much? I asked. Another $60,000, she said, to cover the gap period. I was quiet. I know, she said. I know it's a lot. Maurice, I know I keep coming to you, but this deal is worth millions when it closes. I just need to hold it together for 4 more months. Send me the documentation on the licensing delay, I said. She sent me a letter from a law firm in Jakarta. It looked official. I had no way to verify a Jakarta law firm from my study in Westchester. That was the truth of it. I transferred $60,000. That brought the total to just over $197,000. By this point, my liquid savings had dropped from $780,000 to under $400,000. Not all of it had gone to Xanthe. I lived comfortably, had expenses, had taken several trips, but more than $197,000 had, and the number was now large enough that I could feel its weight for the first time. I told Jean the total over dinner, and he put down his fork. "Maurice," he said, "listen to me. I'm your oldest friend. I'm asking you, man to man, have you verified this woman independently, not her paperwork, her business, her actual existence as a legitimate consultant?" "I've been to her office," I said. "Did you call the clients on her client list? Did you call the law firm that sent you the Jakarta letter? Did you hire anyone to run a background check?" I hadn't. I knew that I hadn't. And I knew, sitting there with Jean's eyes on me, that the reason I hadn't was because some part of me had been afraid of what I might find. And that fear itself was the answer. That fear meant I already knew something was wrong. I went home and I sat in my study for a very long time. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk with a notepad and I wrote down every transfer I'd made to Xanthe Montoya, the dates, the amounts, the reasons given. $8,000, $15, $7, $95,000, $60,000. More transfers in smaller amounts in between that I'd barely tracked. It added up to $197,400. Then I wrote down what I had received in return, some warm conversations, some genuine feeling moments, $11,000 paid back, paperwork that I had not verified. A relationship that I had told myself was the most meaningful thing in my life since Patricia died. I wrote down Patricia's name on the notepad. Then I crossed it out. Not because she didn't deserve to be there, but because I knew, sitting there at 2 in the morning, that I had used the memory of what I lost as a reason to stop being careful. I had wanted something so badly that I had made myself stupid. A man who had run complex systems across 4 continents, who prided himself on due diligence and analysis, had transferred nearly $200 to a woman he had met at a networking event in Manila without doing a single independent verification. I felt sick, not dramatically, just a quiet, deep nausea, like a stone settling into cold water. I called Xanthe the next morning. I was calm. I did not accuse her of anything. I told her I needed a pause on any further financial discussions. I told her I wanted to spend some time reviewing everything carefully before we talked about the joint venture again. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I understand, Maurice. Of course, take whatever time you need." Her voice was even. Not hurt, not defensive, just even. That evenness scared me more than anything else she could have said. I hired a due diligence firm in April 2023. I did not tell Xanthe. The firm, a small outfit in Singapore that specialized in Southeast Asian business verification, took 3 weeks and charged me $4,500. Their report was 22 pages long. Xanthe's consulting firm was real. It was registered, it had filed taxes, it had operated legitimately for approximately 6 years. That much was true, but the joint venture did not exist. The Indonesian consortium was not registered anywhere the firm could find. The Jakarta law firm's letter was from a real law firm, but the specific partners named in the letter had no record of that engagement. The $95,000 I had transferred to establish the joint entity had gone into Xanthe's personal business account and had not been designated to any external entity. The regulatory delay had generated a letter that the due diligence firm characterized as containing inconsistencies with standard Indonesian legal correspondence. I read that report 3 times. Then I put it in my desk drawer and sat very still. I called Gene. "How much is gone?" he asked. "Close to 200,000, I said. "But Gene, she's asking for more." She came back to me last week with another ask. $80. 00 for what she's calling a bridge to the first client payment. "Tell me you didn't send it." "I didn't send it," I said. He exhaled. Okay. Maurice, what do you want to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. And that was the honest answer. Because here is the thing that nobody tells you about being in this situation. Even when you have the evidence in your hands, even when 22 pages of professional analysis tell you what happened, there is a part of you that still doesn't want it to be true. There is a part of you that goes back through every conversation, every shared dinner, every quiet moment, and tries to find a corner of it that was real. I wanted there to be a corner. I wanted Xanthe to have genuinely cared for me in some fraction of our time together. I wanted at least some of it to have been true, but wanting something to be true has never made it so. I flew to Manila in May 2023. I did not tell Xanthe I had the report. I arranged to meet her at a restaurant we'd been to many times, a place near her office in Quezon City. She came looking exactly as I remembered her, composed, unhurried, dressed simply. She ordered tea. "I've missed you," she said. "I've been thinking," I said. "About what?" "About the joint venture," I said. "About the $95,000. About the Jakarta law firm." Something in her face moved. Not much, just enough. "I had a due diligence firm verify the consortium," I said. "They couldn't find it." She was quiet for a moment. "The Indonesian side restructured," she said. "There was a corporate reorganization. The entity you'd be looking for wouldn't appear under the same name." "Xanthe," I said quietly. "Stop." She stopped. The silence between us lasted a long time. Outside, Manila moved. Motorbikes, jeepneys, a vendor calling something I couldn't translate. The restaurant hummed around us like nothing was wrong at all. "I'm not going to make a scene," I said. "I'm not going to involve the police. That's not what this conversation is about. I'm here because I needed to look at you." She met my eyes. "Did you ever actually care about me?" I asked. It was a terrible question. I knew it was terrible, but I had flown 12 hours to ask it, and I was going to ask it. "Things are complicated, Maurice," she said finally. "That's not an answer." "I know," she said. She looked down at her tea. She didn't say anything else. I sat there for another few minutes. Then I left some cash on the table for the drinks, and I stood up. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't call after me. She just sat there, hands around her cup, looking at the table. I walked out into the Manila afternoon, and I felt emptier than I had ever felt in my life. I came home to New York, and I sat with the reality of my finances for the first time with full clarity. No self-protection, no rationalizations, just the numbers. I had $362,000 left in liquid savings. That was not a catastrophic number in isolation. It was still money that many people would be grateful to have. But I was 71 years old. I had no income beyond my pension, which was $3,800 a month. I had property taxes on the Westchester house. I had maintenance costs. I had Carolyn's future to think about. Not that she needed my money. She had her own career. But I had always planned to pass the house down to her. I had calculated, at the pace my savings were draining through living expenses and the transfers I'd made, that I would need to be very careful. I could make it work. It would be tighter than I'd planned, but I could make it work. Then the message came. It was June 2023, 6 weeks after I left her in that restaurant. I had not heard from Xanthe since then. No messages, no calls, nothing. I had been grieving the relationship in the way you grieve something that ended badly, with the added shame of having been foolish. I had told Carolyn a partial version of what happened, enough that she knew there had been significant financial loss. Not all of it. The message was from Xanthe. It was long. 3 paragraphs. She said that the Indonesian consortium had finally resolved its restructuring issues and that the joint venture was back on track. She said that the first client contract was about to be signed, a value of over $2 million. She said she needed one final injection of capital to complete the legal formation of the entity, and that once the contract closed, she would repay everything I had given her with interest. She needed $185,000. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I did something that I cannot fully explain, even now. Something that I have turned over in my mind 100 times trying to understand. I seriously considered it, not for long. But I considered it because $2 million would have meant a full return of my money, because there was still a part of me, a stubborn, foolish, lonely part, that was not ready to accept that all of it had been a performance, that kept looking for the version of events where some of it was real. I sat at my desk and I looked at the numbers in my savings account. $362,000. I couldn't transfer $185,000 from liquid savings without leaving myself dangerously thin. But I could borrow against the house. I want you to understand the state I was in when I made that calculation. I was 71 years old. I had been in a relationship, or what I believed was a relationship, for nearly 2 years. I had already given away $197,000. The thought of losing that amount permanently, of accepting that it was simply gone with nothing to show for it, was more than I could process rationally. The mind does strange things with sunk costs. It tells you that the next investment will recover the previous ones. It tells you that stopping now means accepting total defeat. I went to Patrick Doyle's office. I borrowed $505,000 against the house, not the $185,000 she asked for. I borrowed more because I told myself I needed a buffer. I needed operating capital. I needed to not be left vulnerable after the loan. I don't fully understand my own reasoning. I think I had entered a kind of fugue state where the numbers stopped feeling real. I transferred $185, zero, to Xanthe 3 days after signing the loan documents. She confirmed receipt. She said the legal formation would be complete within 30 days. She said she would be in touch. I never heard from her again. The messages stopped. The calls went unanswered. Her firm's phone number rang through to voicemail. Her email address eventually stopped receiving. By August 2023, Xanthe Montoya had gone completely silent. I sat in my house in Westchester with $320,000 in cash, a $505 Zusen mortgage I hadn't carried in 14 years, a monthly payment of $2,900 that nearly wiped out my entire pension, and the slow, grinding understanding that I had done this to myself. I told Carolyn everything in September 2023. She came to the house on a Saturday afternoon, and I sat her down in the kitchen, and I told her all of it. The full amount, the mortgage, the reason I had borrowed against her inheritance without telling her. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She sat very still in the same chair where her mother used to sit, and she listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, I need you to hear me. I'm not angry at you. I'm scared for you. I know, I said. We need a plan, she said. We need to know if the house can survive this. We spent 4 hours at my kitchen table with my financial statements. Carolyn is an accountant. She has her mother's precision and her father's stubbornness, and she went through everything without flinching. By the end of the afternoon, we had a plan, a tight one, a plan that required me to reduce my living expenses significantly, to potentially rent out one floor of the house, to use a portion of my remaining cashier's reserves as a payment buffer. You won't lose it, Carolyn said. Not if we're disciplined. You won't lose those. I'm sorry, I said, about your inheritance, about all of it. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Dad, she said, you were lonely. You were heartbroken. You wanted to love someone. That's not a character flaw. It's human. She took advantage of that. I nodded. But I also knew that it wasn't that clean. Xanthe had taken advantage, yes, but I had also ignored warning signs. I had chosen, deliberately, not to verify. I had borrowed $505, 00 against my family's home, while in what I can only describe as a kind of emotional delirium, and no one had forced me to do that. She had asked for $185,000. I had chosen to borrow $505,000 because I had talked myself into needing a buffer. That was my choice, my error. That distinction matters to me. Not as a way to let her off the hook. What she did was a deliberate and calculated deception, and I have no doubt about that, but as a way to understand what actually happened. I wasn't just a victim. I was also a man who wanted so badly to believe in something that he stopped thinking clearly, and I need to own that part. Gene came over the following week. We sat on the porch with coffee, and he didn't offer advice. He just sat with me, the way old friends do when advice isn't the point. What are you going to do with the rest of it? He asked eventually. Live carefully, I said. Pay the mortgage. Rent the upstairs to a couple. Carolyn's already found someone. Keep the expenses tight. And the rest of it? The money that's gone? Gone, I said. He nodded. She wasn't entirely fake, I said. And I didn't know if I believed it or if I just needed to say it. Some of it was real. I think some of it was real. Gene looked at me. Maybe, he said. Does it matter? I thought about that for a long time. No, I said. I don't think it does. I am 72 years old now. I carry a mortgage I did not have 2 years ago. My monthly payment is $2,900 and my pension is $3,800, which means the mortgage eats most of what I bring in each month. The upstairs tenants, a young couple, both teachers, cover the rest and then some. I am not comfortable, but I am not losing the house. I think about Xanthe sometimes, not with anger. I've worked through most of the anger, mostly with a kind of baffled sadness, the way you think about something you still don't fully understand. She was smart. She was disciplined. The patience it took to run that kind of operation, maintaining a relationship across 2 years, calibrating every ask, managing my psychology with that kind of precision, it required a level of skill that I can't entirely dismiss. In another life, if she had pointed that intelligence towards something legitimate, she might have built exactly the kind of consulting firm she pretended to have. I don't know what she needed the money for. Survival, maybe. Or something else entirely. Something I never glimpsed, because I never looked hard enough. I tell myself it was survival. It makes the whole thing slightly less impossible to accept. What I know for certain is this. I was a man who understood complex systems and still couldn't see the one I was inside. I was a man who had spent 4 decades making sound decisions and made the worst possible decisions in the span of 2 years. I was a man who had been a respected executive, someone with a reputation, a legacy, a track record, and I mortgaged all of it, literally, for a feeling I couldn't verify and a future I couldn't prove existed. I was a man who confused wanting something to be real with it actually being real. And that confusion cost me $505,000 I borrowed against my house, $197,000 I gave away before that, and something harder to name, the version of myself that believed I was immune to this kind of thing. The morning I signed the loan documents in Patrick Doyle's office, I was still that man, the man who thought his reputation and his discipline protected him. I am not that man anymore. I'm not sure that's entirely a loss. Carolyn calls every evening now. Not out of obligation. She started calling more after September, and the calls are longer and more honest than they used to be. We talk about things we never talked about before. About her mother. About the years when I was too absorbed in work to be fully present. About what I want the next chapter to look like and how to build it without needing to borrow from anything, a bank or a person or a version of myself that was already gone. Gene and I still have dinner every couple of months. He never says he told me so. That's a quality in a friend that I have come to appreciate more than I know how to say. The house is quiet most evenings. The young couple upstairs moves around above me, footsteps, the occasional laugh, music played low. It reminds me that the house is still alive, still doing what houses are supposed to do. I sit in my study, some nights with the lamp on and the window open, and I think about the man I was in that hotel room in Quezon City, taking Xanthe's hand across the table for the first time and feeling the city hum around us and thinking, this is it, this is the thing, this is real. He wasn't stupid, he wasn't weak. He was just a man who had been alone long enough that warmth felt like truth, and that's a human thing, a forgivable thing, if you're willing to be honest about what it cost. I am willing. I owe Patrick Doyle's bank $505, 000, and approximately 14 years of monthly payments if I keep to the schedule. I owe Carolyn an inheritance I may not be able to fully restore. I owe Gene an honesty I should have offered sooner. I don't owe Xanthe Montoya anything, and she doesn't owe me an explanation. I think I understand what happened well enough. A woman who was very good at reading people found a man who was very good at not looking closely at things he didn't want to see. The rest was just arithmetic. 40 years of building something solid, a career, a home, a reputation. Then 2 years and a woman with careful words and steady patience. And now I am rebuilding, quietly, without drama, without the luxury of pretending I didn't have a hand in what happened. It's slower this time. It's less certain, but it's honest. And honest, I've decided, is something